If you want a whole bunch of interest and offers in college recruiting, then it is critically important that you contact schools that not only you are interested in, but that you are also not interested in. And I know that sounds bizarre and that doesn't seem to make any sense, but in this video, I'm gonna show you why it is critically important that you do this. If you don't know who I am, my name is Jack Kruger. I played at 2 different Division I schools. I've been through the transfer portal. I played 7 years of professional sports and I've helped hundreds of athletes navigate college recruiting. So when you're talking about building a target list, most families do this right here, okay? So a lot of families come to me and they put 10 to 30 schools on a target list. They say, these are the schools that we are contacting, we're emailing, we're reaching out to. And so most families spend roughly 6 to 12 months pursuing these 10 to 30 schools. Now, a lot of families struggle to actually generate interest from these 10 to 30 schools. And the reason why is because this is actually a pretty small window in college recruiting. 30 schools might sound like a lot to you, but in college recruiting, that's actually a very small window to try to get into. And so that is one reason. But the other reason is if these are your favorite schools, I'm willing to bet that there are some reach schools that are in those 10 to 30. Schools that your kid is very excited about, but that you and I both know that there's a very low probability that your kid actually plays at those schools. You sort of leave those on the list just in case they happen to work out and because your kid's excited about them and you don't want to shut them down, right? And so most families have 10 to 30 schools, some of these being reach schools, and they try to contact them and generate interest for 6 to 12 months. But because of all the reasons that we just said, a lot of times families struggle to generate the interest that they're looking for. And so after 6 to 12 months, they say, hey, you know what? We need to expand the number of schools that we're contacting because we're not getting any interest from the schools that we're working on right now. The problem is that you've lost 6 to 12 months of time. And so there are significantly less spots by the time you expand here than there were in the beginning. And so it's still, even though you expanded your list, it's still just as hard to generate interest because a lot of these schools have already filled some of their spots in their rosters. They have less money to go around. And so then families still struggle to generate interest there. And by the end of the process, and maybe you have friends or you have family, people you know who get to this point where they say, hey, look, I'll just take anything I can get. Like, I just need something. It would be nice to be wanted by somebody. And so my thing is, hey, if you're willing to expand down here, can we just do that first? Can we generate as much interest as we possibly can in the beginning of the process, and then you can always filter down later? Right? The idea is that, hey, if you can get 5 to 15 schools interested, then you can go research those 5 to 15 schools and find ones that would be a really good fit for your kid. But at this point, you have momentum. Instead of going the opposite direction, by the time you're at the end of the process, you're choosing between 3 to 5 options that you have rather than expanding your list and taking anything you can get and settling at the end of the process, like in this case. And most families do this right here. Right? They don't do this because they say, hey, my kid is not interested in 100 different schools. I know, I know your kid wants to play D1 and I know your kid wants to play in Power 4 conferences. And I understand that. And maybe you're thinking, hey, my kid's not a D1 player, but we still don't really have 100 schools that we're interested in. I get it. But I promise you that you will be in a significantly better position in college recruiting if you contact 100 schools than if you contact 10 schools. And part of the reason is, let's say that you contact 10 of your favorite schools. Okay, one of them might respond. And I'm going to show you the math on this in just a second. But one of them might respond. Let's say they do. Let's say your kid loves Stanford and Stanford responds. And you're like, wow, we got this response from Stanford. This is amazing. Do you know one of the first questions Stanford is going to ask you? They're going to ask you, so who else are you talking to? And if you say nobody because you only contacted 10 schools and 9 of them didn't respond, which would be normal in college recruiting, then Stanford is going to go, well, why not? If your kid was a good player, wouldn't there be a whole bunch of interest here? And then there's going to be doubt in Stanford's mind, and all of a sudden you're fighting an uphill battle with a reach school to begin with. And I don't want that to happen because if you contact 100 schools and Stanford says, who else are you talking to? And you say A, B, C, D, E, and you start listing them off, Stanford's going, oh, wow, this is highly coveted property. This is great. This kid must be really good. And that's exactly what we're looking for. Not to mention, if you're later in the process and you have 10 interested schools and you really want Stanford, but they haven't given you an offer yet, and you have 10 other offers, I'm making up an arbitrary number, but you have 10 offers, And you're like, should I wait for Stanford to offer me? Absolutely, you should, because you have 10 other offers. If 5 of those drop off tomorrow, you still have 5 offers you can take. You've built leverage, you've built that safety net. But if you only contact 10 schools and you have 1 offer and Stanford comes along and hasn't given you anything yet, and you're like, should I wait for Stanford? You can't really do that because you don't have any leverage. That 1 offer you have could leave immediately. That could vanish in a heartbeat, and all of a sudden you don't have anywhere to play. And so that, at the end of the process, is where you're going to wish, man, I wish I had contacted more schools. I wish we had more interest, more offers, more options, because that is what's going to make the end of the process significantly easier. The bummer is that you build that leverage at the beginning of the process. And if you wait until the end of the process to do that, it's going to be significantly harder. Now, let me show you the math behind this, because I know some of you are thinking, Jack, 100 schools is crazy. Like, I didn't even know there were 100 schools out there. I couldn't name 10 schools. I get that. Okay, I get that. But also, I will tell you that we do this with families on a daily basis. So I promise you that it is possible. Okay, so 100 schools. Let's do the math here. And there's some writing on here already. Sorry, I pretty much give this same spiel like 5 times a day. So anyway, let's use 10 schools because it's an easy number. Okay, so if you contact 10 schools, 8 out of the 10 are going to open your email. That's an 80% open rate. Again, I'm just showing you some averages. Some people get way lower than this. Some people get higher than this. But let's say 8 out of 10 open your email. Okay, of the 8, 6 of them will need your kid's position in grad class. Because if they don't need your kid's position in grad class, then they're not going to recruit your kid, no matter how good they are. So they need your position in grad class. This number right here will depend on how early or late you are in the process. If you're early in the process, it might be 8 out of 8 because every school is still recruiting for your kid's position in grad class because you're very early. If you're late in the process, that number might be 4, it might be 2, because you're late in the process and a lot of positions and classes have already been filled. And so let's just say it's 6 out of 8 for now, okay? So of those 6, roughly 40% are gonna watch, 4 out of 6 are gonna watch that video. That's 60%. It's a very high click-through rate. A lot of people have lower than a 60% click-through rate. But again, I'm being generous here. So let's say 4 out of the 6 watch your video, and of those 4 that watch your video, we started with 10 schools, 4 of them have actually watched your kid's video. Roughly 1 of them will think that your kid is good and respond. Now, if your kid is extremely good, like a top 5, top 10% player, that number might be 3 or 4 out of 4. Most people, it's 1. Some families, it's 0. Okay. So in general, we can say that if there are 10 emails, 10 schools that you contact, roughly 1 of them will respond positively. And this is distracting me, so I wonder if it's distracting you too. 1 of them will respond positively. That would be a response to your email, a follow on social media. It could be calling your coach, right? And so if you're a good player, that number might be higher, but for most, it's going to be 1 out of 10. And so if you contact 10 to 30 schools, you're pretty much capping yourself at 3 interested schools. And if that's 3 interested schools and a third of them give you an offer, which again would be very generous, that will probably not happen. But even if it did, you're looking at 1 offer that you're pretty much forced to take. And that's it. And so the simplest way to get more responses is to contact more schools. And the thing about recruiting is that it's pretty much like a snowball. The more interest that you generate, the easier it is to generate more interest because you have that instant validation. There are lots of other coaches who have validated that you are a good player, and so it saves coaches a lot of time. And so we need to send more emails, contact more schools if we want more responses. And this is just math. Of course, these numbers might change if your kid is really good, or they might change depending on the schools that you're contacting. Are you contacting top 4 power conferences, or are you just contacting lots of different types of schools, right? Depends on whether you're early or late in the process. But the idea here is that you are creating a significantly larger margin for error by increasing the number of schools that you contact. And so that's why I say, hey, there are going to be schools that you're not totally stoked about that you're contacting. But here's the thing. The thing is that I've seen it a million times, which is that the ugly duckling can become the swan. The school that your kid is not that excited about ends up being an amazing opportunity. And this is usually how that happens, okay? Usually, a school shows interest in your kid, and your kid is not that excited because they're like, I don't really want to go to that school. But they're like, hey, it's nice to feel wanted by somebody, right? And so that coach from the school ends up calling your kid, and your kid takes the call because they haven't gotten interest from anybody else. And they're like, all right, well, I might as well take the call, even if it's just for practice, for when my favorite school calls me. So ends up talking to that coach, and your kid and that coach start to build like a little bit of chemistry over a few months. And the kid then goes, hey, you know what? I really like that coach. I wish that coach was at a different school, but I really like that coach, right? And so eventually that coach says, hey, you know what? I'd love for you to come on campus. I know you're not totally sold here yet, but I'd love for you to come on campus and see what it's all about. And your kid, because they've built up that relationship with that coach, says, okay, you know what? It wouldn't hurt to just go see. I'll do it for the coach, right? And your kid goes on campus and goes, this place is actually not that bad. This is better than I thought. I could see myself here. And all of a sudden, the ugly duckling becomes the swan. The school that your kid would never have given a chance to, all of a sudden becomes an incredible opportunity. And it is in that moment that you will be grateful that you contacted that school months earlier when neither you nor your kid had any interest in that school. The problem is that hindsight is 20/20. And I'm trying to tell you months in advance what you will be saying eventually, because I've been there. I've seen it happen hundreds of times, okay? And so I'm trying to ingrain this into you. Just please trust what I have to say and go contact A, more schools, and B, schools that you are not completely sold on yet. Okay? Because either those schools are going to help you get your top schools interested, or you're going to struggle to get interest from your top schools, and you're going to be glad that you have other options later on in the process. So instead of leaving it to 10 to 30 schools that you are contacting, and if you're wondering how I got that number, it's because almost like 80% of the families I talk to say that that's the number of schools that they talk to. I'm not just pulling that number out, right? It's because this is what most families do. And I'm telling you that you don't want to be most families. If you want interest in offers in recruiting, you cannot do what most families do, because most families do not get interest in offers in recruiting. You have to do something different. If you want different results, you have different actions. If you want different rewards, you have different behaviors. And that's why I want you to go contact 50 to 100 schools, understanding that there will probably only be 10 to 30 that you're stoked about, but it's still going to be the best thing for you, okay? If you are the parent of a high school athlete and you want help in the recruiting process, we can help you guide you through that process. There's lots of different ways that we can help. If you're interested in that, there's a link in the description below to book a call with us. Regardless, I will see you guys in the next video.